Hi, Lisa von Drasek from the University of Minnesota Archives and Special Collections. I'm in charge of children's literature, the Curling Collection, where Kate DiCamillo's papers reside.
All of my papers, yeah.
And not only is Kate DiCamillo the Newbery winner this year, which for those of you, we're doing this for IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations conference. This year we're concentrating on young adults, 15 to 21, 22, and as far as I'm concerned, for everybody.
Right.
Kate's new book, Flora and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures, won this year's Newbery Award, the highest honor a book of children's literature can get in the United States. But you're also something else. Can you tell me your exact title?
I am, for the next year and a half, the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature in the United States.
And what does that mean?
That means that I have the wonderful, wonderful job of going out into the world and reminding people about the joy of reading, and also that reading together connects people. And the happy thing about this for me is that I don't have to talk about my books, I get to talk about other people's books. And I am, in addition to being a writer, I'm a reader, and that's how I've defined myself for my whole life. It has been the sustaining passion of my life. So for this next year and a half, I want to see if I can help introduce other people to that passion.
We were invited to speak together by the Youth Services Committee to talk about the importance of reading aloud.
Yes, well, which is wonderful because that's exactly what I want to be talking about as ambassador. I do have a medal.
I like the way you say that.
Yeah.
As ambassador, it's actually real. There's a real medal. Who gives you, who made you?
It's the Library of Congress, and in conjunction with the Children's Book Council and Every Child a Reader, they're the ones that put this together. But I went to the Library of Congress and got the medal from the Librarian of Congress, Dr. James Billingsley.
And one of the things I was thinking about, just in terms of introducing you to people, your books are published all around the world. How many languages now?
I think it's 40, and it might actually be more than 40 languages, but I'm pretty comfortable saying 40.
And when we started talking about reading aloud, just this morning, a librarian in my building, I said, oh, I can't talk now. I'm going to be talking to the ambassador for children's literature about reading aloud to teenagers. And she said, we read aloud to teenagers? And I was...
Well, you know, it's funny because when I go out and do readings of my own work, and generally audiences are half adults, half kids, and sometimes I'll have an audience that's nothing but adults. And it's funny because I am reading to them from a children's book, and you can feel people leaning forward, adults leaning forward. And so sometimes at the end of those events, I will say, go home and read to your adult. And because we think of reading aloud to children, that's very much on people's minds, but we forget to read to each other. And certainly this segment that we're talking about right now gets lost altogether. Most parents would never think of reading aloud to a 15-year-old. You hear of those households where you've got an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old, and the 15-year-old will sneak into the room as you're reading to the 8-year-old. Read to the 15-year-old too. And it's a great way to segue them into adult literature as well.
How do you select a book to read aloud?
I think that one of the great ways to tell whether something's worth reading aloud is to do the first page test. Let's take something that's been around for a long time and is actually an adult book. Can I read to you from this?
I would like you to.
True Grit. It's been around for forever. I only read it because of the film, but I fell in love with the book. Here's the first paragraph, and I think that if you were to read this, to a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, they would sit down and let you keep reading. People do not give it credence that a 14-year-old girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood, but it did not seem so strange then, although I will say it did not happen every day. I was just 14 years of age when a coward going by the name of Tom Cheney shot my father down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and robbed him of his life and his horse and $150 in cash money, plus 2 California gold pieces that he carried in his trouser band. Don't you want to hear the rest?
I do. I wish we had that kind of time today. This is a new book, Noggin, by John Corey Whaley. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't know.
Sounds good.
This book, how I choose books to review, I do something called a standing read. I grab a book off the shelf in my office and I just stand there with my backpack on my back and my coat on, and that's how this book ended up in my house.
Because if you want to keep going.
If I want to keep going.
Does that also then translate into something that would be good to read aloud if it passes that test?
I think first it has to pass the I'm willing to carry it home.
Right.
And then I'm willing to read the whole book. And I would also advise never to read aloud a book you haven't read the whole thing to yourself
absolutely.
first,
Absolutely.
because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
Chapter 1, Advanced Studies in Cranial Reanimation. That's that word.
Reanimation.
Reanimation.
You should never ask me to pronounce anything,
There you
even
go.
though I'm the ambassador.
But we don't worry about that when we read aloud.
No, we don't. You're going to make mistakes. It's a great thing to, can we just pause and say that? Because I think sometimes people are, particularly if you're reading to a young adults are intimidating sometimes. And so you think that you have to read perfectly, and you don't. This is a communal activity. It's entering into the ancient act of storytelling. It's not perfect. It's about connecting, and that's what stories can do. And making mistakes is a way to connect with people. So, okay, go ahead and read, Lisa.
Listen, I was alive once, and then I wasn't. Simple as that. I'm alive again. The in-between part is still a little fuzzy, but I can tell you that at some point or another, my head got chopped off, shoved into a freezer in Denver, Colorado. Just read. This is probably my favorite first line of any young adult book.
You can recite it. You can recite it. It's Feed by M.T. Anderson, and it is a true wonder. And it is a wonder for adults, and it is a wonder for young adults. The title of the first chapter is Your Face is Not an Organ. We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck. You know, this is something else that's worth pausing and talking about, I think, like when you're choosing read alouds, voice, which is one of those things that is impossible to define, but is absolutely essential. Voice matters so much. This has voice. It leaps off the page. Can you define voice?
For me, it's really about believing what's going on.
And voice makes you do that.
Yes.
You do not, it's not that you don't doubt this narrator, it's that this narrator seems absolutely reliable in an unreliable way.
And completely within its own culture.
Right.
So I don't recognize a lot of those words, but it doesn't matter because I already have the feeling I'm with teenagers.
Right. Absolutely. And there's a thing, I don't know if this is in the back of the book, but Tobin, M.T. Anderson, who wrote this, said that he sat around in malls and listened to kids and what they said to each other and wrote down lines, and you can tell, you know, it seems true.
And it's years later, and it's still, and that's the other thing, that things stand the test of time when you can hear the music of the language read aloud.
Which is another good definition of voice. The music of language is present in it. Yeah. So, okay, you've got Emmett Till.
I do have Emmett Till because you said something about voice. This is not a popular volume. This is not something that you're going to see in a mass market store. This is not something you're going to, it takes another human being to hand you this book and say, you have to read this. or may I read this to you?
I was going to say, best yet, if somebody reads it. Do you want me to read?
I want to know, you actually selected this book for this conversation. So if you could say a little bit about why.
This is a book, once you get it in somebody's hands, it's like you said, you're not going to find it in the airport bookstore probably. You're going to have to look for it. Once you get it in somebody's hands, I don't know if I want to say it can change your life, but it can come close to changing your life. It can make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And that's, that wonderful quote from Emily Dickinson about, I know if it's poetry, if it feels like somebody's taken off the top of my head. That's what this does. A Wreath for Emmett Till by Marilyn Nelson. How I came to write this poem. I was 9 years old when Emmett Till was lynched in 1955. His name and history have been a part of most of my life. When I decided to write a poem about lynching for young people, I knew that I would write about Emmett Till. He was lynched when he was the age of the young people who might read my poem. After revisiting what I knew about lynching, reading more about it, and growing increasingly depressed, I also knew that I would write this poem as a heroic crown of sonnets. A sonnet is a 14-line rhyming poem in iambic pentameter? Pentameter. The rhyme scheme I chose to use in these sonnets is called Italian. A crown of sonnets is a sequence of interlinked sonnets in which the last line of one becomes the first line, sometimes slightly altered, of the next. A heroic crown of sonnets is a sequence of 15 interlinked sonnets in which the last one is made up of the first lines of the preceding 14. When I decided to use this form, I had seen only one heroic crown of sonnets, a fantastically beautiful poem by the Danish poet Inger Christensen. Instead of thinking too much about the painful subject of lynching, I thought about what Inger Christensen's strategy must have been. The strict form became a kind of insulation, a way of protecting myself from the intense pain of the subject matter, and a way to allow the muse to determine what the poem would say. I wrote this poem with my heart in my mouth and tears in my eyes, breathless with anticipation and surprise. Can I read the first one?
Sure.
Rosemary for Remembrance, Shakespeare wrote, a speech for poor Ophelia who went mad when her love killed her father. Flowers had a language then. Rose petals in a note said, I love you. A sheaf of bearded oat said, your music enchants me. Goldenrod, be careful. Weeping willow twigs, I'm sad. What should my wreath for Emmett Till denote? First, heliotrope for justice shall be done. Daisies and white lilacs for innocence. Then mandrake, horror, wearing a white hood, or barefaced, laughing. For grief, more than one, for one is not enough. Rue, yew, cypress, forget-me-nots, though if I could, I would.
Could you start the next one?
I was going to ask you if I could, because it's such a compelling...
So do the last line, because that gives you a feeling of why you would turn the page.
Yeah, so the heroic crown that she has woven here. Last line of the first poem, forget-me-nots, though if I could, I would forget him not. Though if I could, I would forget much of that racial memory. You're right, it pulls you forward. But it's that thing where, how many times have you heard this now? Still you can feel like the hairs on the back of your neck. Any young adult that you read this to is gonna then take the rest of the book out of your hand. I would be comfortable guaranteeing that.
The other book of poetry.
Yeah, you gave that to me as a gift, and what a wondrous gift.
What the Heart Knows, Chance, Charms, and Blessings. One of the things I was thinking about as coming into this conversation was what is a book for a young adult and what we call the crossover. Emmett Till was a book published for children, but it's for everyone.
Right. Well, it's a sticky wicket, Lisa. It's hard. I mean, this is more your area of expertise than mine, but I still come down firmly on the side of a story is for everybody, Yeah. Those lines are necessary, and they also make me nervous.
And what the heart knows, chants, charms, and blessings. Joyce Sidman, renowned United States poet for children. This is older than her usual poetry. Shall I?
I wish you would.
This is my favorite poem from
Which
this
one
book.
is it?
A list of things
Oh, yeah.
that will set you free. Feet, wheels, wind, sunshine, words, music, a voice, a touch, caring, not caring. Saying to yourself, I am too old to do this. I am too young to do this. I am too smart to do this. It's not my fault. It is my fault, and I will fix it. I can do this.
I love it. I've given that as gifts to young adults and also to adults, and it's for everybody. So again, those lines are there. They have to be there, but also things skip over those lines all the time. Russia, 1903, The Chosen. On the night of February 12, 1903, a long line of carriages made its way through the imperial gates of St. Petersburg's Winter Palace. The great mansion, which stretched for 3 miles along the now frozen Neva River, blazed with light. Its massive crystal and gold chandeliers reflected 100 times in the mirrored walls of its cathedral-sized reception rooms. The light cast a welcoming glow that contrasted sharply with the snow and ice outside. Bundled in sable, ermine, or mink wraps, the passengers alighted, bracing themselves against the icy wind howling off the Gulf of Finland. They hurried through the arched doorway. It's like a fairy tale.
Did you read Codename Verity?
Oh.
Tell me why you would think this would be a good read aloud.
Oh, well, once you start reading aloud from this, no one's going anywhere. You might as well just hole up and do the whole thing at once, because it is one of the, I mean, talk about a book that, there was a point in this book where, you know, my heart, and you know what I'm talking about, just actually like stopped for a minute. It's hard to talk about this without giving anything away, but I think to read the first page of this would be enough to like show you that an adult or a young adult is not going anywhere once you start reading from this. I read this in one big hungry gulp. Welcome to the beautiful Sinclair family. No one is a criminal, no one is an addict, no one is a failure. The Sinclairs are athletic, tall, and handsome. We are old money Democrats. Our smiles are wide, our chins square, and our tennis serves aggressive. It doesn't matter if divorce shreds the muscles of our hearts so that we will hardly beat without a struggle. It doesn't matter if trust fund money is running out, if credit card bills go unpaid on the kitchen counter. It doesn't matter if there's a cluster of pill bottles on the bedside table. It doesn't matter if one of us is desperately, desperately in love. So much in love that equally desperate measures must be taken. We are Sinclairs. No one is needy. No one is wrong. We live, at least in the summertime, on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts. Perhaps that is all you need to know. It's full of surprises, which is another wonderful thing about reading aloud. Those surprises become communal, and again, it deepens everybody's connection to the story and to each other.
How do we share our enthusiasm without being didactic?
I don't know, and you know, and it's something that I've thought a lot about, you know, doing the ambassador thing, because I think the last thing that we need to do is to guilt people into doing it. And the only thing that I keep on coming back to is that word joy, and that that for the person who is sharing the story with the child or the young adult or another adult, there's so much joy to be had in doing that. And so it's not a prescription, but rather a sharing. And so how do we do that? How do we take this joy and keep it a joy and not a prescription? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge, but the challenge is made a lot less difficult when you have books like these to put in somebody's hands.
Talking about empathy.
Empathy,
before.
that's right,
We were
right.
talking about empathy, and I think the first time I heard that said aloud was Neil Gaiman at a conference, and he was talking about this art form that instills empathy. The literature, fiction. Why do we read fiction? I read fiction also to get into other people's lives. We can travel the world in literature. And into other cultures.
That's a good one to bring
one for
it
you
out.
and one for me.
Oh,
So,
this is a spectacular, spectacular book, and also truly spectacular for a young adult. The Black Eye of the Month Club. I was born with water on the brain. Okay, so that's not exactly true. I was actually born with too much cerebral, thank you, spinal fluid inside my skull. Cerebral.
maybe it is cerebral.
Cerebral. Cerebral. That sounds right.
Okay.
But cerebral spine fluid is just the doctor's fancy way of saying brain grease. And brain grease works inside the lobes like car grease works inside an engine. It keeps things running smooth and fast. But weirdo me, I was born with too much grease inside my skull. And it got all thick and muddy and disgusting, and it only mucked up the works. My thinking and breathing and living engine slowed down and flooded. Wow. Talk about voice.
Sherman Alexie.
And talk about taking you to a place that you don't know. You know, it's a totally different world. And this is another one that you sit down and you don't get up until you finish it.
And the other one, this one, Jenny Brown of Shelf Awareness, said, did you read Crossover? Did you read the Crossover?
Wow.
And when other people are evangelical
About
and
a
want to
book.
talk about a book, I go look for it. And this is the Crossover by Kwame Alexander. Warm up. Dribbling. At the top of the key, I'm moving and grooving, popping and rocking. Why you bumping? Why you locking? Man, take this thumping. Be careful though, 'cause I'm crunking. Crisscrossing, flossing, flipping, and my dipping leave you slipping on the floor while I swoop in to finish with a fierce finger roll straight into the hole. Swoosh.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And you know, this is what it looks like on the page, which is fabulous. And also, when people share other books, or I hear them read aloud, or I hear the words, I may not have been interested in that subject matter, but all of a sudden I'm caught up into it. I'm not a sports person.
Oh, nor am I.
And this cover would not make me pick up this book, but somebody else sharing it with me, I'm caught.
And as you were reading it, I thought, oh, I'm glad that it's you reading it, because I wouldn't be able to read it right, but I would be able to read it right because all the clues are in there.
Here, you want to try?
Dribbling. At the top of the key, I'm moving and grooving, popping and rocking. Why you bumping? Why you locking? Man, take this thumping. Be careful though, 'cause now I'm crunking, crisscrossing, flossing, flipping, and my dipping will leave you slipping on the floor while I swoop in to the finish with a fierce finger roll straight in the whole swoosh. And I heard you read it, but you would think that you would need to practice it, and you don't, because of the way it's just like the page shows you how to do it.
And when
It welcomes you in.
And when I teach teachers, and I'm talking about, they say, oh, I can read aloud. I said, just remember, the author tells you how to read aloud.
Yes.
Each person does it differently. We did not do it the same.
Nope.
But you still can do it.
But it welcomed me in. It let me do it. That's great. Okay, how do you want to close it down, Lisa? What do you want? Well, I want to say the word joy one more time, because we've used that quite a bit. But and that's in what we've read here, that joy is implicit. Like, boy, that's joy incarnate, you know? And so that thing of it not being a duty, but rather a pleasure and a privilege to be able to read a book and to share a book with somebody else. Okay, I'm done talking. You can talk now.
Thank you, Kate DiCamillo.
I guess we're done. Okay.